Today we're going to talk about diversity and multicultural environment. We're going to talk about culture and the functions of culture and diversity as well as inclusion. Culture is an important element of a multicultural environment and obviously multicultural management. And diversity, obviously, in today's workforce is inclusive of different cultures. So therefore, managers need to be sensitive and obviously very, very respectful to all forms of diversity, including culture. What is culture? Culture can be seen as a set of values that are shared by members of any organization that deem it to be acceptable behavior within that culture. And culture is obviously a societal issue. So in a societal context, culture is basically any norms that a group of people shares within that context. Cultures condition people to behave a certain way. So cultures are a shared system of symbols, beliefs, attitudes, values, expectations, and behaviors within a specific environment or culture. So in a way, culture regularizes human behavior within that specific society or organizational culture. One of the best definitions of culture that I have seen comes from Professor Gerd Hofstede, where he says, culture is the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes members of one human group from another. Culture in this sense includes systems of values, and values are among the building blocks of culture. So when the values are very strong, obviously it tends to regularize our behavior toward specific directions based on those values. Now, cultures also have what we call subcultures. So subcultures are cultural groups that exist within a major culture, and they share some elements of the dominant culture and then their own particular culture based on maybe ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, social backgrounds, even professional backgrounds. So subcultures are part of every specific dominant culture. In terms of individualism, this is a worldview that values individual freedom and self-expression in adherence to the principles that people should be judged by their individual achievements rather than social backgrounds. Now, collectivism is a worldview that values subordination of the individual to the goals of the group in adherence to the principle that people should be judged by their contribution to the group. Dr. Hofstede in 2010 added a sixth dimension to his cultural dimensions, which was based on things like individualism versus collectivism, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, time orientation, and so on. So the sixth dimension that he added comes from obviously indulgence versus restraint. So indulgent societies tend to allow gratification of natural human desires that are related to enjoying life and having fun. On the other hand, restrained societies tend to believe that gratification needs should be curbed and regulated by strict norms. Indulgent cultures tend to focus more on individual happiness and well-being. Leisure time is more important and there's greater freedom in personal control. On the other hand, restrained cultures tend to have encouragement of positive emotions being less freely expressed, and happiness and freedom and leisure are not given the same level of importance. In restrained cultures, positive emotions are less freely expressed, and happiness, freedom, and leisure are not given the same level of importance. Indulgent cultures tend to place more importance on freedom of speech, personal control, while in restrained cultures, there is greater sense of helplessness about personal destiny. In indulgent cultures such as the United States, the expectation is that customer service employees should demonstrate their happiness with a smile along with a friendly demeanor at all times. However, in more restrained cultures, such as, for example, the former Soviet Union or Russia, or even Eastern European countries, this might be considered inappropriate or unnatural to simply have a smile in your face all the time when customers come to your company. Indulgence versus restraint would also seem to have an impact on generational differences. So the impact of technology on younger generations would suggest that the need for instant gratification is more prevalent, but obviously we need more research on this area in terms of how technology is impacting our cultural orientations. Hall and Hall talked about context within cultures. So context is the information that surrounds an event and is readily available within the person at a given time. A high context communication or message, for example, is one in which most of the information is already within the person, while very little is in the coded, explicit, transmitted part of the message. A low context communication is just the opposite, where mass of the information is in the explicit code that's being transmitted. High context cultures tend to have long-lasting relationships, shared codes of communication. Superiors are generally held responsible for the performance of employees and in their departments. Verbal agreements are common. Insiders and outsiders are closely distinguished, and cultural patterns tend to change a bit more slowly. On the other hand, in low context cultures, short-term relationships are common. Communication is more explicit. You say exactly what you mean. Authority is included at all levels and kind of difficult to sort of pin down. Written agreements are common. That's why you have more of a need for lawyers to review all the words and sentences that are made in contracts. Insiders and outsiders are less closely distinguished, and cultural patterns tend to change a little more quickly. We also must be concerned about the transculturation concept. Transculturation is the process by which a person adjusts to another cultural environment without sacrificing his or her own cultural identity. Transculturation is the process by which an employee or a person adjusts to a new cultural environment without sacrificing his or her own personal or cultural identity and socialization. Making necessary adjustments without assimilating or losing your own cultural distinctiveness is an element of transculturation. Transculturation can be very empowering when you can adjust to a new situation without obviously sacrificing or compromising your own personal beliefs and values. In a transcultural environment, we need to become the multicultural individuals. These are timeless, universal people who approach the classical ideals of people whose lifestyle is one of knowledge and wisdom, integrity and direction, principle and fulfillment, balance and proportion. Peter Adler in 1970s mentioned that this multicultural person is neither totally a part of nor totally apart from his or her culture. He or she lives instead on the boundary. Yes, multicultural managers will have employees of diverse backgrounds. Consequently, they need to create an inclusive workplace. So all managers and employees should receive a cultural sensitivity and diversity awareness training on a regular or periodic basis. We must also eliminate ethnocentricity. Ethnocentricity is the trait that is especially true of members of a dominant culture, especially if there is a superiority complex where you believe that your ways of doing things are superior compared to all other individuals or all other cultures. So the assumptions people make are often influenced by the cultures they were brought up in during their younger years. We all have prejudices. So prejudice is an attitude, usually with negative feelings, that involves a prejudgment about members of a group. Stereotypes are formed when we ascribe generalizations to people based on their group identities and the tendencies of the whole group rather than seeing a person as an individual who may or may not have these specific tendencies. Nobody's born a racist or a bigot, but some adults voluntarily become one by wanting unearned economic, social, or political success through those who are easily influenced by propaganda and fear. Unfortunately, we see this a bit too often in our workplace. So we must be concerned about diversity and inclusion. Diversity describes all the personal, professional, and cultural characteristics and qualities that make one person similar to or different from another. We have some control over some of these characteristics while very little or none over others, which might be genetic. Some characteristics are more important to who we are as human beings. So different characteristics impact individuals differently at various times or various situations. We need to be concerned about managing diversity, whether it's culture or other forms of diversity in our workplace. So managing diversity is about creating an inclusive workplace and thereby a competitive advantage for the organization through the human resources asset. And obviously the human resources asset is one that cannot be easily duplicated by your competitors. Some people advocate that we drop the word diversity. Instead, we would use the word inclusion. Well, diversity reinforces the idea of casting a token person of color to diversify a project and does not always signify actual change. So the idea here is that inclusion articulates what we really want, and that is to be included. So it's to have a seat at a table where the decisions are being made. Inclusion is the act of being empowered, engaged, and involved within a family, team, organization, structure, culture, or even society in regards to your values, your talents, and your way of life. Inclusion is about trying to understand your own personal beliefs, stereotypes, unconscious biases, and implicit association, as well as those of others, in order to promote respect and cohesion within the team. While we see diversity as describing the individual characteristics among human beings, inclusion is about creating a sense of belongingness for each person within the team, organization, and the culture. So an inclusive learning environment is where all students and participants are actively engaged in the learning process and can fully relate to the concepts of being presented. An inclusive work environment, again, would be where all employees are engaged in what happens in their department and obviously in their job. An inclusive culture exists where members of each group can be heterogeneous. In other words, they can be diverse in many dimensions, and together they create a distinctive competitive advantage through teamwork and their unique cultural knowledge. Cultural competency refers to the continuous process of learning, which enables us as managers, as professionals, as employees, as educators to function effectively in the context of cultural differences, both in society as well as in the workplace. Appreciating, understanding, and valuing personal differences in each of your colleagues and team members and employees can eliminate groupthink in the department or in the team, as well as obviously in the boardroom. So what is groupthink? Groupthink is a pattern of faulty and biased decision making which occurs in groups whose members strive for agreement among themselves, often at the expense of accurately assessing information based on relevant facts at a given time. So groupthink is not a desirable objective in today's diverse and very complex world. However, groupthink usually happens in homogeneous teams, in groups, because everyone's societal values tend to be very similar. Today's cultural company managers and professionals should act as cultural allies. Cultural allies are those individuals who intervene and interrupt to raise awareness, to stop mistreatment and injustice in their vicinity, to make other people think about right versus wrong, and obviously to create fairness in the workplace. So these interventions in interruptions can be in the workplace or in societal setting. So diversity should not be seen as an artificially designed imposition. By nature, we're all diverse as species. In the physical world in which we live holds to the law of diversity as well. We all cannot think the same, look the same, behave the same, or have the same beliefs, values, and attitudes, as that would be a very boring and dull world indeed. Our future depends on how much we embrace diversity and create inclusion for each human being. As competent and professional managers, you can create an inclusive workplace by tolerating differences, respecting new ideas and people of diverse cultures, by understanding the goals of the department and objectives of the department while engaging your employees, and finally by executing according to, obviously, the mission and values that respect everybody in the department. Effective multicultural management in diversity management inclusion is about creating a workplace that works for everyone. It's about creating harmony in your head, or your thinking, in your heart, in your feelings, in your habits, or your behaviors on a day-to-day basis about individuals of diverse backgrounds and cultures. Effective multicultural management is about creating an inclusive workplace that works for everyone. Good luck.